I guess this is just the day for hypocrisy. And we're going to get into this story here about Kyle Kulinski and Joe Rogan. Crazy things that are happening, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't done so, go ahead and smash that like button. We'll go ahead and dive right into it. So apparently Kyle Kulinski is now taking shots at Joe Rogan. Now, Joe Rogan is someone that greatly elevated Kyle Kulinski and his show, his brand. There are a number of you that found Kyle Kulinski because he was on Joe Rogan's show, and he's been on there multiple times. But it seems to come about after this announcement here from the New York Post. It says that Joe Rogan hints he will record from Mar-a-Lago with Trump as walk-on guest after refusing to travel for Harris. So this article, again, is from the Washington Post. It says podcast guru Joe Rogan said Thursday he would be open to recording an episode of his wildly popular show from Mar-a-Lago after refusing to travel to interview Vice President Kamala Harris while she was on the 2024 campaign trail. So let me go ahead and interrupt there and just say, well, I think the difference probably is that he already interviewed Donald Trump in the studio. I'm sure if he would have already interviewed Kamala Harris in the studio, he probably would be willing to travel to where she is to do that second interview as well. I think for Joe Rogan, it was just kind of like, well, we do the initial interview here in the studio and the podcast, and Kamala's team just never made that happen. Let's go ahead and continue. Here it says, yeah, we have to. We helped Trump get elected. Rogan blurted out after being asked by comedian Ari Shaffir about heading to Trump's West Palm Beach, Florida estate during a 13th sit down with other fan favorite guests and fellow comics Mark Normand and Shane Gillis. Shaffir first floated the idea of recording another session at the president-elect's resort on January 14th to coincide with the release of his Netflix comedy special, America's Sweetheart. Can we get together? He's asking. Trump obviously is going to walk on. 100% Rogan agreed he's going to walk on if we do Mar-a-Lago. If there's a camera, then bro. So yeah, apparently this really pissed off some people, in particular Kyle Kulinski. It goes on to say when they gather in the studio, they protect our park members. Rogan, Shaffir, Norman, and Gillis always get wrecked, leaving listeners to speculate how the soon-to-be 47th president, who is a lifelong teetotaler, would handle the debauchery. Trump's elder brother, Fred Trump Jr., died from a heart attack in 1981 due to his descent into alcoholism. So that's another thing. I don't think Donald Trump drinks, so he probably wouldn't be partaking in that. Rogan 57 said he's already spoken to Donald Trump Jr. about the possibility, and the president-elect's eldest son said he could make that happen. The Rogan Experience recorded a wide-ranging, nearly 3-hour interview with 45th president in the final stretch of the 2024 campaign, in which they talked about Trump's policies, his views on his first term in the White House, expectations for a second term, and his personal life. It goes on to mention the podcast had monster traffic with more than 20 million views in the first 20 hours after it was posted. Trump on the eve of election day, while also praising billionaire Elon Musk from buying Twitter, turning it into X, and backing the former president as well. If it wasn't for him, we'd all be fucked, Rogan said about Musk. He makes what I think is the most compelling case for Trump you'll hear. And I agree with him every step. For the record, yes, that's an endorsement of Donald Trump. Now, I just want to be very clear here. I am not a Joe Rogan stan, never have been. I watch his podcast every now and then. It depends on who the guest is. And I'm not a supporter of Donald Trump, despite what some people would try to tell you. I voted for Jill Stein. I support third party and independent candidates. Now, this being said, I think it is important to note that Kamala Harris had the same opportunity to be on Joe Rogan's podcast. And while she was in Texas, she decided to have a rally in Houston where Beyonce was featured, didn't give a concert, but she was featured, but you wouldn't go to Joe Rogan's show. And I said it back then that I thought that that was a terrible mistake. I think she should have appeared on Joe Rogan's show. That being said, Joe Rogan has changed politically. At one point in time, he supported Bernie Sanders during his 2020 campaign. He supported Medicare for all. I believe there was an interview with Rogan and Kyle Kulinski where Rogan said he started to change his mind about Medicare for all. And Kyle was telling him, no, you can't do that, etc. I believe that was one of the interviews that Spotify removed from Joe Rogan's podcast. So Joe Rogan has changed over the years politically, which some people do. But I think it is important to also mention that Joe Rogan's podcast is not a political news show. It's a show that covers all different topics. He interviews all different types of guests, from comedians to actresses and actors in Hollywood. He talks about UFOs. They talk about MMA. They talk about comedy. They talk about everything, which sometimes includes politics. But Joe Rogan's show is not a political news podcast. Joe Rogan has said so himself multiple times that you should not take his advice about politics. And it's interesting because in that statement, Joe Rogan said that the people you should take political advice from were Crystal Sager and Kyle Kulinski, which is hilarious because I actually don't think you should take political advice from those individuals. But he shouted them out. He brought them on the podcast. Crystal and Kyle have been on the podcast. Crystal and Sager's been on the podcast. Actually, it was Crystal and Sager, and Kyle Kulinski came onto Joe Rogan's podcast multiple times by himself. I say that because now here's Kyle Kulinski, who was apparently upset about the story that I just read to you. And he said that Rogan is fake independent media, barely a comedian anymore. He's morphed into state media for Trump. He's more like Rush Limbaugh than George Carlin. So let's go ahead and debunk this first part here. Rogan is fake independent media. I don't remember Joe Rogan ever saying he was independent media. I think most of us know that Joe Rogan has a Spotify contract. So I wouldn't call him independent media. Again, it is a podcast where people talk about a number of issues, a number of topics. Again, I'm not here to defend Joe Rogan. I don't agree with Joe Rogan on many things politically. But I also know it's not a political news show, and I never remember Joe Rogan saying that his show was independent media. So that's the first part. The second part, barely a comedian anymore, and he's morphed into state media for Trump. Well, isn't that the pot calling the kettle black? Because people can say something similar about Kyle Kulinski. People can say that Kyle Kulinski morphed into state media for Kamala Harris. Now, some of you who are new to Kyle's channel may wonder, why is this an issue? It's an issue because this is something that Kyle said he would not do and that you should not do. Kyle Kulinski, I first became aware of during the Bernie campaigns. So we started watching him back in 2016-ish. He was one of the people that talked about having universal policies, that a Bernie campaign, really is the way to go, that we should have healthcare for everyone. And I agree about those issues. And I agreed with him on those issues. And I supported Bernie Sanders. He was the one that also told us that we should not support and back candidates that take corporate money. He went as far as to start Justice Democrats with Cenk Uygur from TYT to push back against corporate money, to get candidates that were supposed to be of the working class to basically take over the Democratic Party. As they described it, it will be a hostile takeover. We see that hasn't happened, but a hostile takeover of the Democratic Party to get into Congress and to make the Democratic Party what it should be, a party for the working class, a party for the everyday people. So what was interesting to me is that the person who told you that you shouldn't back candidates that take corporate money, that they're all corrupt, that you also should care about the environment. If you look at Justice Democrats' policies and like where they were supposed to go as an organization, you can see all of this. So why is it interesting is because this same person is coming after Joe Rogan and is saying, Joe Rogan, you changed. You morphed into state media for Donald Trump. But Kyle Kulinski, ever since Joe Biden won in 2020, Kyle Kulinski morphed into state media for corporate Democrats. Once Joe Biden won in 2020, and I guess Kyle realized he couldn't just talk about Trump all the time because Trump didn't win, and there was no Bernie Sanders, running at that point in time, or running for 2024, Kyle Kulinski started to do the same thing. Kyle Kulinski morphed into state media for corporate Democrats. He was constantly defending Joe Biden. And don't get me wrong, like there were times when he did criticize him, but for the most part, he was arguing for Joe Biden. He was making the case for Joe Biden, even when a lot of us saw that Joe Biden should have never continued on in this race. So he tried to find a way to combat that with, how can I still maintain and hold on to the progressive base that I have, right? While also building a larger following with those who are the moderate liberals who did support like a Joe Biden, who do support corporate Democrats. So then comes the idea of Marianne Williamson. He said this himself on the Crystal and Kyle podcast. Well, Marianne, I asked you to run for president, right? Because Kyle Kulinski needed a Bernie type candidate to run again, in order to remain relative with the progressive community, but also to continue to build his brand. Now, Marianne Williamson was no Bernie Sanders, which we called very early on. She agreed on a lot of the universal policies and Medicare for all, but she never had the energy and charisma and that type of command that Bernie Sanders had. She was never able to excite people the way that Bernie Sanders did. Once they started to realize that Marianne was not going to work out and this was not going to be beneficial to them monetarily, then all of a sudden, Kyle Kulinski endorsed Jill Stein. And a lot of people got excited about this and said, oh, this is going to be great. Kyle is moving towards the third party lane. And I warned you back then that the moment that someone else were to step into this race, that Kyle Kulinski would jump right back over to the Democrat Party machine, because that is his base of viewers. This show in particular, we have a diverse group of people that watch this show. We have people that watch my show that are Democrats, some that are Republicans, some that are post-duopoly like myself, but we have a mixture of people that watch the show. Kyle Kulinski, after Joe Biden's win, has managed to build up a significant base of Democrat moderates, right? As well as some of the progressives that he managed to hold on to. So he endorsed Jill Stein. I'm going through the timeline here for those who are not aware. He endorsed Jill Stein. The video is still out there. You can see it on Jill Stein's YouTube channel, which some of you may not be aware of because he doesn't want to probably bring this up anymore. And then the moment that it was announced that Biden was out and Kamala Harris was the nominee, he jumped on that Kamala Harris train. All of a sudden, it didn't matter if the candidate was taking corporate money. So the same way that Kyle Kulinski is claiming that Joe Rogan sold out, Kyle Kulinski also sold out. And we're going to see before and after video to show you how he changed over the years. So is it really fair for Kyle Kulinski to point fingers at Joe Rogan when he also moved further to the right? No, he didn't move all the way to the extreme right. He's not supporting Donald Trump, but he moved to the right because he moved towards the more moderate centrist Democrats. Even right now, Kyle Kulinski is trying to make the case that, well, Kamala shouldn't run again for president of the United States, but she should run for governor of California. Once again, why is it the person who co-founded Justice Democrats trying to make the case for corporate candidates? Why is he trying to make the case for a candidate that is now saying they support fracking? I thought that was something that you were supposed to be against as a progressive. Why is he trying to make the case for someone who's against Medicare for all? That was the litmus test for progressives, because that is Kyle Kulinski trying to grow his brand. He realized that the Bernie wave may be toast. So he's like, how can I continue to grow this show? I'm going to have to go along with the corporate Democrats and then try to make some excuses along the way. So is it fair for Kyle Kulinski to point fingers at Joe Rogan here and say that, oh, you're fake independent media? He's more like Rush Limbaugh than George Carlin. Is that fair for Kyle Kulinski to do, knowing that he changed as well? I would argue that it's not fair. especially considering, what did I just tell you? Joe Rogan is not a political news show. Your show, however, Kyle, is a political news show. This is the same guy who sat up there and tricked his viewers into believing that Kamala Harris not only was going to win the presidential election, but that she could win a state like Florida. Kyle Kulinski's show was starting to sound more and more like MSNBC. He has changed from who he used to be. But never forget that Joe Rogan actually was the one who supported Kyle Kulinski and promoted him. Joe Rogan responded to this and he said, former podcast guest. Now, we'll see what some of the replies were here. I know that Nico responded. Nico's response, I think, is pretty base. And you promoted his show too. Crazy to watch how quick they switched up after they think they don't need you anymore. Political disagreements are one thing, but throwing out disingenuous ad hominem attacks to pander in an effort to discredit people you know personally is clown shit. He knows y'all actually agree on more things than you disagree with, but at the end of the day, politics is just a job to him. And Nico is spot on here. That's a question I have. For these commentators that are friends, that know each other like that, why don't they have this conversation in private? Why didn't Kyle Kulinski contact Joe Rogan and talk to him about this behind the scenes? Why did he have to put this up on Twitter? Now, for me, it's a little bit different. I don't know Joe Rogan. I don't know Kyle Kulinski. I don't know a lot of people in independent media. So for me, if I have no way to contact them, that's a little bit different. But if that's your friend, why would you throw your friend under the bus on social media? And this is not to say that Joe Rogan's views have not changed. They have changed. But again, it is not a political news show. Kyle's is a political news show, and his views have changed. And I feel like he's not getting as much pushback for this as he should. I feel like he should be getting a lot of pushback, especially when you see some of the things that Kyle Kulinski used to say and you compare it to what he's saying right now. Take a look at this.
The former Soviet Union and other authoritarian dictatorial regimes. We're really talking about other people being dictatorial. And Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, as bad as Biden is, you guys are significantly worse, and it's not even close. The Democrats are just way better. They're just way better. They're a trillion times better than Republicans.
Now watch this. Watch him compare to his old self.
All right, so there's a lot I have to say in response to this. These kinds of criticisms from this guy, I honestly believe that these people usually overstate how bad Trump is, and they understate how bad Biden is. Well, you're...
Pause. Everybody see the difference from the old Kyle? The Kyle that I used to watch is the Kyle in the green room. The moment Kyle left that green room, after Biden won, dyed his hair blonde, everything changed. Now, I don't know if Kyle Kulinski is trying to get a spot on CNN or MSNBC, or if he's trying to get some type of maybe appearance on those shows. I don't know what's going on, but it's very clear to me that people are following the money. And I explained to you before how the algorithm works. If you support one of the two parties, the algorithm supports you more favorably. I have been fortunate that I've been able to grow without supporting the Democratic Party or supporting the Republican Party. But part of that has to do with the fact that there are a number of people in independent media that have promoted me, that have given me the opportunity to speak on their shows. So that's where a lot of that comes from. And I still thank those people for that. Whether we still agree politically today or not, I still appreciate that opportunity. It appears Kyle Kulinski doesn't appreciate that opportunity from Joe Rogan anymore because his channel is growing tremendously since he got on that Kamala train. I'll show you that in just a second. Let's continue.
More ideologically in agreement with Biden than you are in agreement with Trump. Well, actually, when it comes to the First Step Act, I agree with Trump on that. When it comes to pardoning Alice Johnson, I agree with Trump on that. When it comes to TPP, Trump's against it, Biden's for it. I agree with Trump on that. I agree more with Trump on North Korea than I agree with Biden. I would need to be convinced that Biden would fight for at least one or two of my top 5 issues. Medicare for all, free college, living wage, ending the wars, and UBI. The people who say Trump is a fascist and they think he's like, basically, we can't survive another 4 years of America with him. Yes. The country will survive 4 years with Trump. The country will survive 4 years with Joe Biden.
What happened to that person? What happened to that person? Because you see, now he says the opposite. And for people who say, oh, well, maybe, he just got Trump derangement syndrome. No, it's called following money. It's called following the money. I never thought, honestly, when I watched that show back in the day, I never thought that Kyle, of all people, would go this route. But that's exactly what he's doing.
Again, I think they understate how bad Biden is. Why? On so many core issues, he's against us. Me, at least. I can't speak for this guy. Joe Biden pushed for NAFTA. He repeatedly pushed for TPP. He's a supporter of the Iraq War. On all the pivotal issues of his time, he was wrong. So stop overstating how bad Trump is. The country's still going to exist in 4 years. And understating how bad Biden is. Because it's annoying. I just don't agree with the people who are like, he's a fascist, he's a Nazi, the country's not going to exist in 4 years. You're hyperbolic and you're ridiculous.
So obviously that would be Kyle referring to himself, right? That would be Kyle Kulinski referring to himself, because he is now one of those people that's doing that. And I want to show you something. When I say it's all about the money, look at where Kyle Kulinski is now. Kyle Kulinski now has 1.41 million subscribers. Kyle Kulinski did not have that until after he started to get on the Kamala train. His channel started to grow tremendously after they pushed Marianne Williamson, and then again after he jumped on the Kamala bandwagon. His channel grew. He is now ahead of Breaking Points, and that was never the case. Breaking Points always had more subscribers than Kyle Kulinski did. Now he has more subscribers than they have. I also found it interesting that of all the people that pushed Kamala and said she was definitely going to win, a lot of those channels lost subscribers after Election Day. Whether it was 100 there or 100 there or whatever, they lost subscribers. Kyle Kulinski gained subscribers. Now, somebody make that make sense to me, considering he lied to all of you guys, right? And he said she was going to win Florida. So I don't even know if, we talk about fake independent media, Kyle. We don't even know if, are you independent? Is Kyle truly independent media? Well, what has happened here? Because it makes you wonder if there was some type of backroom deal that was done, because he's being heavily boosted through the algorithm. And I'm not one to come on here and say, oh, I'm so suppressed. And da-da-da. We all know independent media is suppressed on YouTube. But all of a sudden, once he got on that Kamala train, he has been heavily boosted on algorithm. I didn't used to see Kyle Kulinski videos on my homepage for at least like the past year and a half. Now, all of a sudden, that's all I see. So what he is doing and what he's talking about is greatly working with the algorithm. So the word on the back behind me on the chalkboard says hypocrisy. Is it fair for Kyle Kulinski? Is it fair for Kyle Kulinski to call out Joe Rogan for supporting Trump, and he supported Bernie in 2020, when Kyle Kulinski was supporting Kamala Harris, a corporate candidate who's still supporting her for governor of California, by the way, and he supported Bernie in 2020? I want to remind you again, Joe Rogan's show is not a political news show. Kyle Kulinski's show is. So yes, people have changed their political views, but it's very clear to me that some people are moving in a direction that benefits them monetarily, and others are just a podcast that never claimed to be a political commentator, and they're just shooting the breeze. You decide. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.